The Galactic Council Chamber was enormous. It was built in the shape of a great circle, with rows of seats rising up like steps in every direction. At the center sat the oldest and most powerful species, the Drayli Dominion, the Torhan Empire, the Pelori Collective. Their seats were carved from rare stone, polished and glowing under soft golden light. And then, at the very edge of the chamber, almost against the back wall where the light barely reached, there was a single row of plain metal chairs. That was where the humans sat. It had been that way for 94 years. Yuna stood from her metal chair and walked to the speaking platform at the center. She moved slowly, not because she was tired, but because she had learned a long time ago that rushing made the council nervous. They did not like it when humans moved too fast. They did not like it when humans spoke too loudly. They did not like humans very much at all. She placed her notes on the platform and looked out at the chamber. 1,000 faces looked back at her, some with curiosity, most with boredom, a few with open disgust. She had seen those looks so many times that they no longer hurt. They just felt like weather. Honored members of the council, Yuna began, her voice calm and steady. I come before you today to present once again the proposal for shared distribution of the Valen plague cure. As you know, the plague has now spread to 3 systems. Over 11 million lives are at risk. Earth's medical teams developed a full cure 2 years ago. It was peer-reviewed. It was approved by your own science board. We are asking only for permission to distribute it freely. She paused. The chamber was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that means people are listening. The kind of quiet that means people are waiting for her to finish so they can move on to something else. Elder Vorath, the head counselor of the Drayli Dominion, leaned forward in his great stone seat. He was old. His skin was pale gray, stretched thin over a long skull. His eyes were small and dark, and they looked at Yuna the way someone might look at an insect that had crawled onto their dinner plate. Ambassador Yuna, he said, his voice dry and slow. The Council appreciates Earth's continued enthusiasm. However, we feel that further review is necessary before any distribution can be approved. There are concerns about long-term effects on non-human biology. Yuna did not blink. The review was completed 14 months ago, Elder Vorath. Your own science board certified it safe for all known species. Then perhaps a second review, Vorath said, and he smiled. One can never be too careful with the health of the galaxy. A few council members chuckled softly. The vote to delay was passed in under a minute. 11 million lives would continue to wait. Yuna gathered her notes, bowed to the chamber as protocol required, and walked back to her metal chair at the edge. Sunwoo was waiting for her in the hallway outside. He was her second in command, a tall man with broad shoulders and a jaw that was almost always tight with anger. Today was no different. He fell into step beside her as she walked, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. 14 months, Sunwoo finally said, his voice low. They sat on it for 14 months, and now they want another review. People are dying, Yuna. I know. We could distribute it ourselves. We have the shits. We have the supply. And they would call it a violation of the Emergent Species Protocol. They would sanction us. Again. Yuna kept walking. Her eyes were clear. There was no anger in her expression. There was something worse. There was acceptance. They were never going to say yes, Sunwoo. Not today. Not ever. It was never about the cure. It was about making sure we remember where our seat is. Sunwoo stopped walking. He watched her continue down the long, empty hallway, her footsteps echoing against the stone floor. He wanted to break something. He wanted to go back into that chamber and say every word he had been swallowing for years. But he did not, because Yuna had asked him not to. And if Yuna, who had more reason to scream than anyone he had ever known, could keep her voice steady, then so could he. 3 floors below the council chamber, in a small room that no alien had ever visited, Hana sat alone, surrounded by screens. She was young, barely 30, with round glasses and ink stains on her fingers from a habit she refused to give up. She was Earth's cultural historian, responsible for recording and uploading humanity's contributions to the Galactic Archive. Music, literature, agricultural science, medical research, philosophy. 70 years of free knowledge, shared openly with every species in the galaxy. Today, she had found something that made her stomach turn. She called Minji. Minji arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing her lab coat, her hair tied back in a loose knot. She was Earth's chief scientist, a woman who spoke more to machines than people, and preferred it that way. She looked at the screens Hana had pulled up and said nothing for a long time. "They are editing us out," Hana said quietly. "Look, the agricultural database. Humans developed the Tori grain modification that feeds 60% of the outer colonies. The credit now lists the Draley Science Institute, the plague research, the early vaccine work, all reassigned. Our music archives have been moved to a restricted section. Restricted. Our music." Minji stared at the screens. Her expression did not change, but her hand found the edge of the desk and gripped it. "How long has this been happening?" "Years. Maybe longer. I only noticed because I was cross-referencing our original uploads." Hana pulled off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "They are not just ignoring us, Minji. They are erasing us." Minji was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that Hana did not expect. "Come with me. I want to show you something." She led Hana deep into the basement of the human embassy, past locked doors and security checkpoints, into a room that hummed with a low, steady vibration. At the center of the room stood a machine unlike anything Hana had ever seen. It was beautiful and terrifying, a twisting column of light and metal that seemed to breathe. "What is this?" Hana whispered. "I call it the Exodus engine," Minji said. "I have been building it for 11 years. It does not just move ships. It folds space, entire star systems. It makes them invisible, undetectable, gone." She turned to Hana, and for the first time, Hana saw something in Minji's eyes that she had never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, relief. "They do not want us here, Hana. So I built the door we will leave through." That same night, 12,000 light-years away, Admiral Tejo sat alone in his quarters aboard the flagship Goryo. The ship was silent around him. He held a sealed envelope from Earth's United Parliament. He already knew what it said. He had known for months. He opened it anyway, read it once, and set it down. He did not cry, he did not smile. He simply looked out the window at the stars he had spent his whole life protecting, and whispered a single word. Finally, the morning of the vote, the council chamber was fuller than it had been in years. Every seat was occupied. Every balcony was packed. Word had spread that the Regulation of Emergent Species Act would be put to a final vote today, and the whole galaxy wanted to watch. Everyone knew what the act really was. It was not written for all emergent species. It was written for one: humanity. The act was simple in its cruelty. It would limit human expansion to 3 systems. It would cap their research funding. It would place their military under council oversight, meaning they could not move a single warship without permission from species who openly despised them. It would, in every way that mattered, put humanity in a cage and call it regulation. Elder Vorath stood at the speaking platform, his thin hands folded behind his back. He read the terms of the act in his dry, careful voice, and when he finished, he asked for a second. Warden Grell, the military commander of the Torhan Empire, raised his hand immediately. His face was hard and satisfied. He had pushed for this act more than anyone. He feared humanity, Not because they had ever attacked anyone, but because they could. Because their ships were fast, and their soldiers were brave, and their scientists kept solving problems that older species had given up on centuries ago. That kind of potential, Grell believed, needed to be controlled before it became a threat. "The vote will now proceed," Vorath announced. "All in favor." Hands rose across the chamber. One by one, the great species of the galaxy voted to chain the youngest among them. The count was quick. 11 in favor. Vorath did not even try to hide his satisfaction. All opposed. A single hand rose. Speaker Luneth of the Pelori Collective. He was a gentle being, tall and thin, with large soft eyes that always seemed to carry more sadness than his words expressed. He had spoken against the act in private sessions. He had written formal objections. He had begged Vorath to reconsider. None of it had mattered. "The motion passes, 11-1, Vorath said. "The Regulation of Emergent Species Act is now galactic law." He turned his small dark eyes toward the back of the chamber, toward the metal chairs at the edge. "Ambassador Yuna, the floor is yours for a response, if you wish." The chamber shifted. 1,000 eyes turned to the outermost ring. This was the part they had come to see. The human reaction. Some expected anger. Some expected tears. Some expected threats. A few, the crueler ones, expected begging. Yuna stood. She smoothed the front of her jacket, a simple dark blue suit with no medals, no decorations, nothing but the small earth pin on her collar. She walked to the speaking platform the same way she always did, slowly, steadily, her back straight and her hands still. She took a breath, and then she smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a broken one, a real, warm, gentle smile. It confused them. Every single one of them. "Thank you," she said. The chamber went very quiet. "Thank you, truly, for 94 years. Yuna's voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of that enormous room. "When we first came to this council, we were young. We knew nothing about the galaxy. You taught us everything. You taught us how to navigate the trade routes. You taught us how to communicate across species. You taught us how to sit quietly while our proposals were denied. You taught us patience." She paused. No one moved. "In return, we tried to give what we could. Our medical teams cured the Velen plague. Our scientists developed the Tori grain that now feeds 60% of the outer colonies. Our soldiers guarded 4 frontier zones so that your people could sleep safely. Our artists shared their music, their stories, their paintings, freely and with joy. We asked for nothing in return. We only asked to be allowed to sit in this room." Her eyes moved across the chamber, touching each face. Some looked away. "Today you have told us clearly where we stand, not with words of cruelty, with a vote, clean and official. We hear you, we understand." She placed both hands flat on the platform, and her voice dropped lower, not in anger, but in something that felt heavier. "We came to you with open hands. You taught us that open hands get stepped on. We thank you for the lesson." She bowed, a deep, respectful final bow. Then she turned and walked back to her seat. She gathered her notes, she picked up her bag, and she walked toward the doors of the chamber without looking back. The silence in that room was unlike anything anyone had ever felt there. It was the silence of 1,000 beings realizing, all at once, that something had just ended, and they were not sure what it was. Vorath cleared his throat. "Well," he said, forcing a small laugh, "humans and their theatrics. Shall we move to the next agenda item?" A few council members laughed with him. It sounded hollow. Grell said nothing. He sat with his arms crossed, watching the doors where Yuna had disappeared. His face was hard, but his eyes, for just a moment, were uncertain. Luneth did not laugh. He did not move. He sat perfectly still, staring at the empty metal chair at the edge of the chamber, and he felt something cold growing in his chest. He had heard every word Yuna said, and he knew, with a certainty that frightened him, that she had not been making a speech. She had been saying goodbye. Sunwoo was the last. He had stayed behind while Yuna left, standing just inside the great doors at the back of the chamber. No one ever did. He looked at the delegation desk where he had sat for 12 years. The small metal nameplate that read Earth was still there, slightly scratched, slightly crooked, pushed to the very edge of the desk like everything else human in this place. He walked over and picked it up. It was light. He turned it over in his hands, ran his thumb across the engraved letters, and then slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. He stood there for one more moment, looking at the vast chamber with its golden light and its ancient stone and its rows of powerful beings who had never once looked at him and seen an equal. Then he turned and walked out. No one stopped him. No one even noticed. 8 hours later, aboard the flagship Goryo, Admiral Tejo sat in the command chair of the bridge. The ship was quiet. His crew moved around him with calm, practiced efficiency. There was no panic. There was no rush. Everything had been planned for years. Tejo opened a galaxy-wide communication channel. Every human frequency, every embassy, every research station, every hospital, every colony, every ship. He spoke 2 words: "Come home." The message traveled at the speed of light across the galaxy. And wherever it landed, the response was the same. Quiet understanding. No questions, no arguments. On a medical station orbiting a dying star, human doctors finished their last shift, handed their notes to confused alien colleagues, and walked to their ships. On a frontier outpost at the edge of wild space, human soldiers lowered their flags, packed their gear, and left their posts unmanned for the first time in 50 years. On a farming colony in the Drayli Outer Territories, human agricultural workers harvested one last crop, left detailed instructions pinned to the barn doors, and drove to the landing pads without saying goodbye. Across the galaxy, quietly and without drama, humanity began to leave. Not in anger, not in war, not with fire. They packed their things, they closed their doors, they turned off their lights, and they went home. Nobody in the council noticed. Not yet. But Luneth sat alone in his quarters that night, staring at the ceiling, and he could not shake the feeling that the galaxy had just made the worst mistake in its history. The first month was easy. The council barely noticed. A few reports came in about human embassies shutting down, but Vorath waved them away with a flick of his thin hand. "Let them sulk," he told the council. "They will be back in a season. Where else would they go?" The chamber laughed. It was the last time they would laugh about anything for a very long time. By the second month, the Velen plague began to spread again. It started slowly. A few cases on a Pelori border world, then 100, then 1,000. The cure that humanity had developed, the one the council had refused to let them distribute, had been administered by human medical teams in dozens of stations across 3 systems. Those teams were gone now. The stations were dark. The medicine was still there, stored in sealed containers with clear labels and detailed instructions, but no one had ever learned how to make more. The humans had always just handled it. Vorath ordered the Council's science divisions to replicate the cure. The best Drayli scientists studied the formula. Minji had published it openly years ago, free for anyone to use. The chemistry was not even complicated by galactic standards, but the manufacturing process required a specific technique, a way of stabilizing the molecules that human biochemists had perfected through years of trial and error. The Drayli scientists could not replicate it. The Tauron scientists could not replicate it. No one could, because no one had ever bothered to learn. 11 million lives had been at risk when Yuna asked for permission to distribute the cure. By the end of the third month, the number was 40 million. The frontier was next. Humanity's patrol fleets had been guarding 4 of the galaxy's most dangerous border zones for over 60 years. They had done it for free. No payment, no recognition, just quiet, steady protection of trade routes and colony worlds that belonged to species who had never once said thank you. When the human ships left, those borders went dark overnight. Warden Grell was the first to feel it. Pirate warbands, held at bay for decades by human patrols, poured into Council space within weeks. They hit trade convoys. They raided outer colonies. They burned a Tauron fuel depot that supplied half of Grell's eastern fleet. Grell scrambled his warships to fill the gaps, but his forces had never been designed to cover that much space. The humans had made it look easy. It was not easy. It had never been easy. They had just never complained. Grell went to the Council and requested an emergency increase in military funding. Vorath listened, nodded, and then denied the request, citing budget regulations. The same regulations that had been written to contain humanity. Grell sat in his chair and said nothing. The irony was not lost on him, but he would die before admitting it. The cultural collapse came slower, but it cut deeper. For 70 years, humanity had been the galaxy's most prolific creators of art, music, literature, and entertainment. Alien species consumed human content at staggering rates. Human songs played in restaurants and markets on 100 worlds. Human films were the most watched media on the Galactic Network. Human books were translated into every known language. None of this had been forced. None of it had been marketed. Humans just made things, beautiful things, strange things, things that made other species feel something they could not name, and they shared them freely. When humanity left, Hana activated a protocol she had built quietly into every cultural archive on the Galactic Network. Every file, every song, every painting, every book, every piece of human knowledge and creativity that had been freely given to the galaxy for decades was deleted. Not locked, not restricted, deleted. The servers went blank. Billions of hours of content gone in a single night. The reaction was immediate and enormous. Public broadcasts went silent. Entertainment channels had nothing to show. Schools lost access to teaching materials that half the galaxy's education systems depended on. On the Pelori homeworld, children cried because their favorite bedtime songs, human lullabies translated into Pelori, had disappeared from their parents' devices overnight. Luneth heard about it and locked himself in his office for 2 days. When he came out, his eyes were red, and he would not speak to anyone. He went to the human embassy one evening, alone. The building was dark. The doors were unlocked. The halls were empty and clean, stripped of everything personal. No pictures on the walls. No coats on the hooks, no coffee rings on the desks. It smelled like nothing. It felt like nothing. It was as if no one had ever been there at all. Luneth walked through the silent corridors until he reached the ambassador's office, Yuna's office. The room was bare except for the desk, which had a single item left on its surface, a folded piece of paper, handwritten in Yuna's careful script. He picked it up and read it. You were kind to us, Luneth. We will remember that. He sat down in her chair. He sat in the dark, holding that piece of paper, and he did not move for a very long time. Meanwhile, in a small archive room in the Council's administrative wing, a young Athen diplomat named Evaye was doing something dangerous. She was digging through classified records. Evaye had always been curious about humans. She had watched them from the upper balconies of the council chamber for years, fascinated by the way they carried themselves, the way they spoke softly even when they were being insulted, the way they kept showing up with cures and solutions and offers of help, even after being rejected 100 times. She had never understood it. Now she wanted to understand what had been done to them. It took her 3 weeks of careful searching, but she found it. Buried deep in Vorath's administrative files, locked behind security clearances that should have stopped her, but did not, because no one expected a junior diplomat to look. She found decades of suppressed reports. The reports were devastating. They showed that humanity's contributions to the galaxy outweighed every other species in 6 major categories: medical aid, refugee support, frontier defense, agricultural science, cultural exchange. In every single category, humans had given more, done more, and asked for less than anyone else. And in every single case, the reports had been buried, hidden, reclassified, by Vorath, by Grell, by a dozen council administrators who did not want anyone to know how much the galaxy depended on the species they kept in the back row. HFY copied everything. She stored it on a private device. She did not know what to do with it yet, but she knew she had to keep it safe. And then, 3 months after humanity began to leave, Minji activated the Exodus engine. The effect was instant and absolute. The Sol system, Earth's home, along with 12 colony systems that had followed humanity into silence, simply vanished. One moment, they were there, visible on every star chart, trackable by every sensor in the galaxy. The next moment, gone. No explosion, no flash of light, no debris. Just empty space where billions of humans had been. Every sensor array in the galaxy screamed. Every astronomer, every scientist, every military strategist stared at their instruments and saw the same thing. Nothing. Where Earth should have been, there was nothing. Not hidden, not cloaked, truly, completely, impossibly gone. As if they had never existed at all. Vorath received the report in the middle of the night. He read it 3 times. Then he sat on the edge of his bed, alone in his vast quarters, and for the first time in his long life, his hands shook. Grell received the report on his warship. He stared at the empty coordinates on his tactical display for a full hour without speaking. His officers were afraid to approach him. Luneth was still in Yuna's office when his communicator buzzed with the news. He did not react. He simply folded Yuna's note, placed it in his pocket, and closed his eyes. Quieter than it had ever been. And in that silence, for the first time, everyone could hear what had always been there, hidden beneath the noise of politics and prejudice and petty cruelty. The sound of everything humanity had held together. 5 years passed. The galaxy did not recover. It learned, slowly and painfully, how to survive without the species it had thrown away, but it did not recover. There is a difference between surviving and living, and the Galactic Council learned that difference the hard way. The Drayli Dominion was the first to crack. 3 of Vorath's outer colonies depended entirely on agricultural techniques that human scientists had developed and taught to Drayli farmers decades ago. The techniques themselves still worked. The crops still grew. But when the soil began to change, as soil always does over time, and the old methods needed adjusting, there was no one to ask. The human agricultural advisors who had lived among the Drayli for 40 years, who had eaten at their tables and learned their language and treated their sick animals for free on weekends, were gone. They had left behind manuals and guides, detailed and generous as always, but the manuals could not answer new questions. The manuals could not walk through a dying field and say, "Ah, I see the problem. The nitrogen balance has shifted. Let me show you what to do." The crops failed on 2 colonies in the same season. Famine followed. Millions of Drayli citizens went hungry for the first time in living memory. Protests erupted. The outer colonies sent desperate messages to the capital. And for the first time in his career, Elder Vorath faced something he had never faced before. His own people, looking at him not with respect, but with blame. The challenge came during a full session of the council. A young Drayli governor from one of the starving colonies stood at the speaking platform, the same platform where Yuna had said goodbye, and pointed directly at Vorath. "You drove them away," the governor said. Her voice shook with anger. "You drove away the only people who kept our fields alive, and you did it with a smile. My people are starving because of your pride." Vorath tried to respond. He opened his mouth, and for the first time in 90 years of politics, no words came out. He looked around the chamber for support. He found none. The vote to remove him from his seat was swift and overwhelming. He left the chamber the same way Yuna had, through the great doors at the back, except no one bowed, no one thanked him, and unlike Yuna, he had nothing graceful to say. He simply walked out, an old man whose power had been built on the back of a species he had never respected, crumbling now that they were gone. He never mentioned humanity in public again. He could not bring himself to. Grell's fall was louder. The frontier had become a nightmare. Without human patrols, pirate war bands had grown bold, organized, and cruel. They controlled entire trade corridors. They held colonies for ransom. Grell's Tauron fleet was stretched across 4 border zones, bleeding ships and soldiers in fights they could not win because they could not be everywhere at once. The humans had been everywhere at once. Grell had never understood how. He understood now. It was not superior technology. It was not greater numbers. It was simply that they cared. They had cared about every border, every colony, every trade ship, every refugee shuttle, because that was who they were. You cannot replace that with warships. You can only replace it with more caring. And the Tauron Empire had never been built on caring. In desperation, Grell hired mercenary fleets. Many of them were from species that had once been allies of humanity. Former trading partners, former neighbors, former friends who remembered how humans had treated them with warmth and respect. These mercenaries took Grell's money, but they did not hide their contempt. One captain, a scarred old pilot from a species that had shared a border with human colonies for 50 years, looked Grell in the eye during a briefing and said, "You chased away the only people who would have fought for you for free. Now you pay us triple and get half the work. How does that feel, Warden?" Grell did not answer. He ended the briefing early and sat alone in his quarters. He was a military man. He understood strength and weakness, victory and defeat. But this was something different. This was not a defeat on a battlefield. This was the slow, grinding realization that the thing you destroyed was the thing that was keeping you alive. There is no strategy for that. There is no weapon that fixes it. Luneth, meanwhile, had become something he never expected to be. A leader. With Vorath gone and Grell discredited, the council turned to the only member who had voted against the act. The only one who had opposed humanity's mistreatment from the beginning. They made him head counselor, not because they believed in him, but because they had no one else. Luneth accepted the role with no celebration. He knew it was not a reward. It was a punishment. He was being asked to fix what could not be fixed. On the first anniversary of humanity's disappearance, Luneth made a decision. He went to the council's main broadcast center, alone, without advisors or speechwriters, and he recorded a message. He sent it on every frequency, every channel, every wavelength that had ever carried a human signal. He spoke for 40 minutes. He did not read from notes. He did not use careful political language. He simply talked, like a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and could not hold it anymore. He named every wrong, the delayed votes, the triple taxes on human aid ships, the stolen credit for human inventions, the edited archives, the buried reports, the act. He named Vorath. He named Grell. He named himself. "I voted against the act," Luneth said, his voice cracking. "I tell myself that every night. I voted against it, but I did not fight. I raised my hand and I said no, and then I sat down and I let it happen." A single vote against cruelty is not courage if you sit quietly afterward. It is just a way of telling yourself you tried. He paused. He wiped his eyes. He continued. If you can hear this, wherever you are, whatever place you have found beyond our reach, I want you to know something. We are sorry. Not because we need you, although we do. We need you desperately, and we know it, and we are ashamed of how long it took us to see it. But that is not why I am speaking tonight. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. We are sorry because you deserved better. You came to us with open hands, just as your ambassador said, and we stepped on them. You gave us your medicine, your food, your art, your protection, your kindness, and we treated you like you were nothing. You were not nothing. You were the best of us, and we knew it. And we did nothing. The broadcast ended. The frequencies stayed open, waiting for a response. There was no response. There would never be a response. On a small Athen research vessel, Evie watched the broadcast, with tears running down her face. She had spent 5 years building her case, compiling the suppressed reports, recovering fragments of Hana's cultural archives that she had secretly copied before the deletion. She had everything. The proof of what humanity gave, the proof of what the Council hid. She published it all the next day. The effect was immediate. Billions of beings across the galaxy saw, for the first time, the full truth. Charts and data showing that humanity had given more than any other species. Records showing that their contributions had been deliberately erased and reassigned. Audio files of council meetings where Vorath and Grell openly joked about keeping humans in their place. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Grief spread across the galaxy like a wave. On world after world, ordinary citizens who had enjoyed human music and eaten food grown from human techniques and been treated in hospitals built by human hands held vigils. They lit candles. They played human songs from memory, imperfect and off-key and beautiful in their sadness. On the Pelori homeworld, a young communications officer named Dale was running a routine scan of deep space frequencies when her instruments picked up something. A ghost signal, faint, almost invisible, buried in the background noise of the universe. It came from the exact coordinates where Earth had been. She adjusted her sensors, held her breath, and listened. For 6 seconds, she heard music, a simple melody, played on an instrument she did not recognize, carrying across the void like a whisper. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. Then it was gone. The frequency went dead. Dale checked her instruments. She ran the scan again. Nothing. She sat at her station for hours, waiting. The music did not return. She filed a report. She told no one else. Some things are too fragile to share. Some goodbyes are too final to explain. The galaxy grieved that night, not for what it had lost, but for what it had chosen to throw away. And the worst part, the part that kept Luneth awake and Grell silent and Eve staring at her screens, was that the grief had no audience. The people they were sorry for were gone. The apology would never be heard. The regret would never be answered. That is the cruelest kind of regret, the kind that has no one left to forgive you. 30 years had passed since the day humanity folded itself out of the galaxy and disappeared. 30 years. Long enough for children to be born who had never seen a human face. Long enough for the scars to settle into something permanent. Long enough for the galaxy to stop pretending it was fine and admit, quietly and with great shame, that it would never be the same. The council still existed, but it was smaller now. Weaker. 3 species had left in the decade after humanity's departure, unwilling to remain in an institution that had driven away its most generous member. The great chamber, once full to the walls with delegates and observers, now had entire sections sitting empty. The golden lights still glowed, but they lit a room that felt hollow, like a beautiful house where no one lives anymore. Luneth was still head counselor. He was old now, his tall frame bent, his soft eyes dimmer than they had once been. He had spent 30 years trying to repair what Vorath and Grell had broken. He had reformed the Council's voting system. He had abolished the Emergent Species Act. He had created new laws protecting younger species from the kind of treatment humanity had endured. These were good things, important things, but they all felt like locking a door after the house had already burned down. His greatest project took 10 years to build: the monument. It stood at the exact coordinates where Earth had once orbited its sun, a vast ring of light, hundreds of kilometers across, floating in the emptiness where a blue-green planet used to spin. The ring glowed softly, a warm golden color that Luneth had chosen because it reminded him of the way sunlight looked in the photographs humans used to share. Photographs of fields and oceans and sunsets on a world that no longer existed in any place the galaxy could reach. At the center of the ring, suspended in the void, a single plaque made of an alloy that would last 10,000 years carried words that Luneth had written himself, rewriting them dozens of times over months until they were as close to right as he could make them. They came with kindness. We answered with silence. Now silence is all that remains. The monument became the most visited site in the galaxy. Ships came from every system, every species, every corner of known space to drift beside that ring of light and read those words and sit with what they meant. Some visitors left flowers, though there was no one to receive them. Some played human music through their ship speakers, old recordings recovered from personal devices, imperfect copies of copies, growing fainter with each generation, but never quite disappearing. Some simply sat in silence and stared at the empty space and tried to imagine what had been there. Eve visited every year on the anniversary of the departure. She was no longer a young diplomat. She was one of the Council's most respected historians, known across the galaxy as the person who had exposed the truth about humanity's treatment. Her archive, built from the suppressed reports and the fragments of Hana's cultural database, was the most accessed collection in galactic history. She had spent her life making sure the galaxy never forgot what humans had given and what the Council had done. She was standing on the observation deck of her ship, watching the monument's light reflect off her window, when every screen on her vessel lit up at once. It happened everywhere: every library, every school, every research station, every personal device on every world in the galaxy. Simultaneously, without warning, an enormous data upload appeared. Billions of files: music, art, literature, scientific research, historical records, philosophical texts, agricultural guides, medical databases, everything. Every piece of human knowledge and creativity that Hana had deleted 30 years ago, restored in full, complete and unaltered. The galaxy held its breath. Attached to the upload was a single message: no sender identification, no return coordinates, no demands, no conditions. Just one line, written in the same careful handwriting that Luneth recognized from a folded note he still carried in his pocket. This was always yours too. Eva read it and pressed her hand against the screen. Around the galaxy, billions of beings opened the files and found the music they had lost. Parents played lullabies for children who had never heard them. Scientists accessed research that had been missing for 3 decades. Artists discovered paintings and stories and films that no living alien had seen before, created by humans in the years after their departure, new and beautiful and given freely to a galaxy that had done nothing to deserve them. The gift was not a return. It was not an opening. It was simply what it had always been. Humanity sharing what it had, because that was who they were. Even after everything, even now. 3 months later, a Tauron salvage crew found something drifting in deep space near the old frontier border. A human black box, the kind installed in military vessels to preserve the captain's final recordings. It was old, battered, scarred by decades of radiation and cold. They brought it back to the council, and Luneth personally oversaw its opening. Inside was a single audio file. The voice belonged to Admiral Tejo. The recording was not a military report. It was not a strategic document. It was a personal log, made in the quiet hours of the night aboard the Goryeo, long after the departure. Tejo's voice was tired but steady, the voice of a man who had carried something heavy for a long time and had finally set it down. "I keep thinking they will ask me if I am angry," Tejo said. "My crew, my officers, they look at me like they expect me to say something about the council. Something bitter, something hard. I understand why. We gave them everything, and they gave us a chair at the back of the room and told us to be grateful for it." The sound of him breathing. "But I am not angry. I tried to be, for a while. It would have been easier. Anger is simple. It gives you something to do, someone to blame. But the truth is, we did not leave because we hated them. We left because we loved them enough to stop letting them hurt us. That is the hardest kind of love there is, the kind that walks away, not to punish, just to survive." Another pause, longer this time. "I hope they are all right out there. I hope the crops grow. I hope the borders hold. I hope someone learns to make the plague cure. I hope the children still hear music." His voice softened. "I hope they know we did not leave in anger. We left in sorrow. There is a difference. Anger wants to destroy. Sorrow just wants to stop hurting." The recording ended. The room was silent. Luneth stood with his hands at his sides, tears running down his old face, and did not wipe them away. He went to the council chamber that evening. It was empty. The session had ended hours ago. The lights were dimmed, the seats stretched out in their great circle, and at the very edge, in the outermost ring, where the light barely reached, the row of plain metal chairs still stood. No one had removed them. 30 years, and no one had been able to bring themselves to take them away. Luneth walked to the outermost ring. He lowered himself carefully into one of the metal chairs. It was uncomfortable, hard and cold. He realized that Yuna had sat in a chair just like this one for years. Every session, every vote, every humiliation, and she had never once complained. He reached into his pocket and took out a small device, a personal music player loaded with a single human song. He did not know the language. He had never learned it. He did not need to. He pressed play. It was simple and slow. A woman's voice singing something gentle over a quiet instrument. A song about home, or loss, or love, or all three at once. The words did not matter. What mattered was the feeling, the warmth of it, the kindness of it, the unbearable generosity of a species that would create something this beautiful and share it with strangers who did not deserve it. Luneth sat in Yuna's chair and listened to the song and wept, not for what the galaxy had lost, but for what it had chosen to throw away. Far away, in a place that no sensor could find and no star chart could reach, a blue-green planet orbited a warm yellow star. The sky was wide and clear. Fields of tall grass stretched to the horizon, moving in slow waves under a gentle wind. Ships sat quietly in harbors. Children played in open meadows, their laughter carrying across the hills. On a quiet hill overlooking the valley, two women sat together in the late afternoon light. Minji was old now, her hair white, her hands still stained with the grease of machines she could never stop tinkering with. Beside her sat Yuna, calm as she had always been, her face lined with years but her eyes still clear. They did not speak. They had said everything that needed to be said a long time ago. They simply sat and watched the wind move through the grass, and listened to the children, and felt the sun on their faces. Somewhere, in a room full of humming machines, a technician noticed a frequency open for just a moment. An old frequency, one that pointed outward, toward the galaxy they had left behind. The technician checked the readings. It was broadcasting something. Not a message, not coordinates, not a call for help or an offer of return. Just the sound of wind through tall grass, carried across the void to no one and everyone. One last breath of a world that had chosen peace over revenge and silence over war. The frequency held for 10 seconds. Then it closed, gently, permanently, like a hand letting go. And the stars, who had seen everything and judged nothing, kept shining, the way they always had, the way they always would, long after the council and the regret and the monument and the music faded. Long after every species that had ever lived among them turned to dust and memory. The stars remembered, even when everyone else forgot.